So our topic is perennial wisdom. If you are involved with the Theosophical Society, you're involved with perennial wisdom. I mean, from Madame Blavatsky on, it's all about this perennial teaching that is at the mystic heart of every religious tradition. So we're going to sort of define that so we have a common language to explore it. But before we do that, I want to deal with this issue of why perennial wisdom is so crucial at this time. So let me tell you what this time is. I believe we are in the first 100 years of a multi-100-year turning called the second axial age. So that begs the question, what was the first axial age? So there is a handout that says second axial age on it, conveniently. The term comes from Karl Jaspers, and it refers to the period 800 to 200 BCE, before the Common Era. And it was during that time period that every religion about which we have written record underwent a similar transformation. You might say from magic to mysticism or from ritual to ethics, but what happened in every case was a realization of 4 points that we're calling perennial wisdom. And I want to come to those in a second. We'll define those in a second. But every religion seems to have undergone this in that period, 800 to 200 BCE. Some of the religions stayed with it, some of them lost it. So Judaism, for example, during that period, that's when the Hebrew prophets were around. And the prophets said, you know, the God of the prophets, I believe all the books of the world's religions are of human origin. I don't believe God wrote a book. I don't believe God dabbles in real estate. I don't believe God chooses one people or another. God doesn't damn and save people. That's not my theology at all. But in the text itself, whoever wrote the prophetic teachings, when they spoke about God and when God spoke to the people, God didn't speak to the people in the way that people were accustomed to being spoken to. So for example, in the prophet Micah, in chapter 6, Micah says, "With what shall I come before the Lord?" So another thing we have to talk about is Lord, completely bad translation, but that's what the English says. "With what shall I come before the Lord? Shall I come with 10,000 gallons of oil to sacrifice? Shall I bring 1,000 rams?" And he goes through a whole list of things, including the firstborn children. And if you were living in that time, and he was saying this, with what should I come before the Lord? And he says 1,000 rams. I mean, you go, oh, got that, 1,000 rams. Check, did that one. And 10,000 gallons of oil. Oh, yep, got that. That was last Wednesday. So the people were going, yeah, okay, did that. And then he does this flip on them. And he says, O humanity, what the Lord requires. And it's just 3 things. Do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. That is a revolution in Judaism of its time. Judaism of its time was all about sacrifice in the temple. It was all about priesthood. The prophets have no interest in the priesthood at all. In fact, the prophets have their God say, different prophets, of course, saying it different ways, "I'm nauseated by your sacrifices." If you read the book of Leviticus, it seems like God is, obsessed with barbecue. Right? But all of a sudden the prophets say, no, God is nauseated by the smell, the stench of your burning sacrifices. And if you're paying attention, you're going, wait a minute, let me get that book again. It said, no, I'm supposed to be doing this. Why is God, rejecting this? Because they were going through this transformation from a sacrificial religion where you have to placate an angry God by killing something so God won't kill you. And you do that by being just and kind and walking humbly with your God. When the rabbis get that's from Micah chapter 6, verse 8. When the rabbis get a hold of it, because of the way the rabbinic mind works, they ask the question, why does it say, do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God? Why doesn't it just say, and walk humbly with God? And their answer is very apropos to our time. Their answer is that no theology is right. Had they known, they were Jewish, Jewish people are obsessed with Chinese food, but in that time, they didn't have the connection. Had they had the connection, they would have quoted Lao Tzu in the opening line of the Tao Te Ching, where Lao Tzu writes, the Tao that can be named or the Tao that can be spoken about is not the eternal Tao. That's how they understood Micah 6:8. And they said, no theology can capture the reality of God. So what Micah is telling us is to walk humbly with your theology. Don't take it so literally. Don't take it seriously. Don't take it as an absolute truth. It's just your way to articulate what is ultimately inarticulatable. So that's from the Jewish perspective. That's the transformation that was going on. Then the temple was reinstated, and the Jews went right back to sacrifice again. The prophets disappeared. You do have rabbis emerging who were opposed but couldn't stop the temple. It took the Romans to destroy the temple to end sacrificial Judaism. Today, there are many Jews in Israel and elsewhere, along with many fundamentalist Christians, who would like to see the temple rebuilt and sacrifice reinstituted. So if that ever happened, I mean, my dad, who died a couple of years ago, my family was Orthodox. My dad would pray several times a day for the restoration of the temple, which meant the restoration of the sacrifice. Now, I don't think my dad was paying any attention to what he was saying when he was praying. It was just, this is what you do, so he's doing it. But if they actually did that and went back to animal sacrifice, 90% of the Jews would just walk away. It's like, okay, that's it, I'm done. A God that needs me to kill something is not the kind of God I'm interested in. But that will never happen, because in order to rebuild the temple, you first have to take down the mosque that's on the Temple Mount, and as soon as you try to do that, it's World War III and it's all over anyway. So if you're worried about what happens to the animals in the temple, don't worry, nothing. If you're worried what happens to the rest of the planet, everything would be a disaster. But when the Romans destroyed the temple and the Jews were in exile, the Jews went back to the first axial turning, back to religion as ethics, religion as compassion. And I'll just stick with this one example, so just to finish out the thought. But in the Talmud, Rabbi Hillel, one of the famous rabbis of the ancient period, Rabbi Hillel was asked to expound the entire Torah, which by his time meant not just the Hebrew Bible, but all the commentaries up to his time in the first century BCE. And they said to him, so expound the entire Torah while you stand on one foot. And he stood on one foot and said, that which is hateful to you, don't do to anyone else. That's the entire Torah. Everything else is commentary. Now go and study the commentary. Now, usually in seminary or in Sunday school, or kids are studying for a bar or bat mitzvah, usually the focus is on go study the commentary, right? Because you've got to study all this stuff. But if you think about it, what he's saying is everything else about Judaism is a commentary on the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule does not appear in the Hebrew Bible. Jesus has his own version of the Golden Rule in the affirmative, do unto others what you would want others to do unto you. But that's not in the Hebrew scripture. Hillel just came up with it. You know what was the entirety of the Torah? He didn't even quote the Torah. He just came up with what is hateful to you, do not do to someone else. That Judaism that he invented on the spot is a Judaism of radical compassion. And then he said everything else is commentary. So commentary simply deepens your understanding of Torah. His Torah is the Golden Rule. Now he's saying everything else, all of our interpretations of texts, all of our holidays, all of our rituals have to be in service to the Golden Rule. If they don't help you become more compassionate and kind and just, then they don't count. They're not really Judaism, according to him. That's the first axial turning. So Judaism started it with the prophets, lost it a bit, came back with it with the early rabbis. Every religion went through similar kind of transformation. You get the Buddha during this period, you get Lao Tzu, you get Confucius, you get the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, it all comes out in the same 600-year period. The argument that, or I don't know if it's an argument, but the proposition I'm putting out here is that it's happening again. That we lost the depth of the first axial turning. We ended up going back to our little siloed religions, and even though we said, don't do unto others what you would not want done unto you, we created all kinds of theologies that were horrific. So I don't know about here in Wheaton or Greater Chicago, but where I live in Tennessee, 9 out of 10 neighbors are convinced that I'm going to hell when I die, because I'm not a fundamentalist Christian. And the only reason it's 9 out of 10 is because my son and his family live next door to me. They're moving at the end of the month. It'll be 10 out of 10. But, that's not what I would want done to me, right? I wouldn't want that done to me, so why would I imagine doing it to someone else? The religions have lost their sense of compassion, whether it's in an afterlife scenario, whether it's in taking over someone else's land, whether it's a caste system, whatever it happens to be. The religions have lost that compassion focus and have gone back to a more power control-based understanding of what they are and what they do. So much so that, again, I can't speak for here, but where I live, it's ground zero for Islamophobia. If there's a mosque, people just get hives. So I don't know if you saw, this was years ago, but CNN did a special, not in my backyard, about building a mosque. It was all about my town. And it was a huge controversy. And at one point, someone wrote a letter to the editor to our newspaper. Our newspaper is very small, it's like 10 pages. And said, I challenge the rabbi, because there's only me in the town, the rabbi, and he named a couple of Methodist ministers and the imam. We only had one, now we have none. And he said, I challenge you to decry all violence done in the name of God. And he was sure we couldn't do it. So we met for coffee with the guy, and before the coffee even was poured, we'd done it already. We wrote up a piece of paper, wrote up a little statement for the newspaper, and it said, we, the undersigned, decry all violence done in the name of God. It was so simple, until I suggested we go a little bit further. And I said, boy, if we can do that, why don't we just add 6 words? We, the undersigned, decry all violence done in the name of God in this world and the next. And they freaked out. And they said, no, you can't do that. I said, why not? They said, because that's God's business. The Muslim was convinced that non-Muslims were going to hell, and the Christian was convinced that non-Christians were going to hell. The only thing they had in common was I was going to hell. And when I suggested that we change this statement a little bit so that no one goes to hell, they said, well, that's God's business. Can't tell God what to do. And I said, of course we tell God what to do. That's what God is all about. We invent what we want, we put it under the rubric of God, and suddenly God says what we want God to say. I mean, God's just an echo in theology, in religion, mainstream religion. God's just an echo of your own ego. So they didn't buy that idea. And they were hoping I would go to hell sooner rather than later. But so we never published the longer statement, but we did publish the shorter one. And that in and of itself was a big deal, because there's so many people who are convinced that their God sanctions violence in this world. So that was a big deal. I shouldn't downplay it. But what's happening now in the second axial turning is that more and more people are getting, for whatever reason, just rediscovering a different way of approaching religion, a different way of approaching the divine, that no longer allows for these silly propositions that God chooses someone and not others, and God sends some to hell and some to heaven, and all that stuff is just disappearing. And sometimes it disappears overtly and the religion just drops it. And sometimes they do it in a more subtle way. One of the great ways of doing it is the Mormon Way. I love Church of the Latter-day Saints. A couple years ago, I was teaching in Salt Lake City, and I went to the Mormon headquarters, and I took the tour, and I was talking to some of the people there. And one of the things that Jews are very interested in, if not apoplectic about, is the posthumous baptism of Jews. So, Mormons believe that you can be baptized after you die. And Jews say that's terrible, that's disrespectful to me and my religion. And they've, from what I've read, they've baptized Anne Frank like 1 million times. They keep baptizing her, then the Jews complain, okay, we didn't do it, and then they do it again. So how many times it takes for her to get baptized, I don't know. But I love the idea of posthumous baptism because, this is how it works if you don't know. So Mormons believe that when I die, if I die as a Jew and not a Mormon, and if you're not a Mormon, you're going to die and go with me, but that when I die, I'm going to go to hell, and it's not nice. I don't really worry about it because I lived in Miami for 20 years. How hot could it be? But anyway, so they say you're going to go to hell. But if someone stands in for you in a baptism ceremony and gets baptized in your name, in Rami's name, then an angel comes to you in hell and says, you've been baptized as a Mormon. If you accept the baptism, you'll go to heaven. So I'll accept. I'll tell you right. What? I've had friends go, well, where's your integrity? I said, what? Integrity? We'll be in hell together, and someone, I'll reject the angel, and I won't go to heaven, I'll be tortured in hell, and some guy's going to lean over and go, well, at least you have your integrity. I don't want my integrity, I want heaven. So if they happen to be right, they give you a way out, which is a subtle way of not taking hell all that seriously, without actually saying, we don't take hell all that seriously. Judaism has a very loose understanding of heaven and hell. We don't even have a theology about it, anything. We don't have an official way of dealing with it. But the one thing that we do say is that if you do go to hell, you only go to hell for maximum, and no one gets the maximum, a maximum of 12 calendar months. Literal months, like on the regular calendar, not like one of those, 1,000 years is a single day, and not one of those months. No, just 12 calendar months. But we're not allowed to say the prayer for the dead for the entire 12 months because that implies it's supposed to alleviate the suffering in hell. If I say it for the whole 12 months, that implies my dad's been in hell for the whole year, and he wasn't that bad. Maybe he's there for a month, maybe 3 weeks, I don't know, but maybe not at all, but certainly not for 12 months. So we only say it for 11 months. And it's minimum and maximum. You have to say it for 11 months so that you can't say, my parent was less hellish, my parent was more hellish. It's just we all say it for 11 months. But that's just another way of saying, hey, we don't take this too seriously. Other religions are more passionate about it. But people are giving up on that. And what's happening is what I'm calling the second axial turning. That people are realizing that these siloed, brand-named religions that are competing with one another and using heaven and hell as part of their marketing campaigns, that these religions are losing their grip on more and more and more people. 66%, if I have my Pew study right, 66% of millennials, so people born after 84, I think, or something like that. But 66% of millennials, the younger generation, have rejected organized religion altogether, and they call themselves different things, but maybe like spiritual but not religious, or what I call the spiritually independent. This is a movement that has never occurred before in the history of humankind. And it's what I'm calling the second axial turning. People are shifting, not everyone, but many, are shifting in their spiritual consciousness away from the brand name competing religions to something else. I don't know if you have this second axial handout here, but I quickly laid out the seven points of how it's happening. So I'm going to claim that it starts in 1875 with the founding of the Theosophical Society. Now, if I were talking at the Unity Church, I would say it started in whenever. But I just I just want you to like me. So. But if you look at Madame Blavatsky's work and the work of the Theosophical Society, not just now, but then, it was all about this notion of a universal spirituality. It was a perennial wisdom tradition. And when we go through the 4 points of perennial wisdom, you're going to see that these are the core ideas of Theosophy as well. So 1875. 1893, you have the Parliament of the World's Religions, the very first one in Chicago, as part of wasn't the World's Fair, but it was Anyone remember what it was called?
Columbian Exposition.
Yeah, right, Columbian Exposition. So along with that was the first parliament of the world's religions, where, for the first time in the history of humanity, people from different faiths came together unarmed to meet one another. And it was men and women. It was just an amazingly radical break with tribe and tradition. And out of the parliament came a real transformation in American spirituality, because you got Swami Vivekananda running around, and it was all done by women, really, right? They hosted Swami, and then they passed him on to their friends in other cities, and he was like, this interesting person that went from, basically wealthy white woman to wealthy white woman, and which is, I'm not knocking it, right? I mean, I wish I was married to one. So, and in Chicago we have the Baha'i Temple that was founded by Baha'u'llah's, is it grandson or son? Anyone know? You ever been there? Yes. Yeah, I mean, you should really go. It's gorgeous. So this was happening all over the country. So I'm saying these are two major events, unprecedented events that are heralding the second axial age. 1922, you get Pierre de Chardin gives a name to this consciousness of which we are all a part, the noosphere. Now, there's been names for it before, Brahman, the divine. I mean, it's not the first time. But he coins this term noosphere, that it's sort of like the cosmic consciousness that we are all moving toward. 1960, we get the military invents the prototype of what becomes the internet. And there are lots of people who think the internet is the way we're tapping into, or maybe even creating, this noosphere, this cosmic consciousness. We can debate that kind of thing. But all of this stuff is new, and it's all breaking down boundaries, breaking down barriers between people. And you can see where where governments are afraid of what's happening. One of the first things they shut down is the internet. You can no longer get Wikipedia in Turkey, I think. Isn't that this week? I think they shut it down. You can't get Wikipedia in Turkey. I don't know what Turkish people will do for cat videos, because they're going to lose YouTube soon. I don't know how that's going to work. But they're afraid of having access to global information and global spirituality and global consciousness. So the fifth one is 1972. The Apollo 17 astronauts take a picture of the Earth floating in space. There's the flag out front, right, the Earth flag that you see up front, just below the flag of the United States on the front lawn of the Theosophical Society. That Earth flag, I had that in my synagogue. We had the American flag, we had the Israeli flag, and we had the Earth flag. And of the three of them, the Earth flag is the one that I think is the ultimate allegiance, and slowly I think we're moving in that direction. But as we move in that direction, nationalist flags are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, it's like everyone's becoming a used car dealership, because they always have the biggest American flags, right? So as the trend is toward globalization, there's always a counter trend pulling it back. No, that's too scary, that's too scary. We have to keep everyone in their little silos. But in 72, you saw the Earth for the first time in outer space. And it was a phenomenon. What you saw, you couldn't deny what you saw. And what you saw was not what you were taught to see. So I was born in 1951, and I went to grade school, and in grade school we always had the Rand McNally flat map, on the wall. And the United States, North America, but the United States was always the biggest country right in the center. Now the fact that it was pink at a time when we were worried about the communists make you wonder about Rand McNally. But still, the idea was you had these distinct countries, and they vied in size, and power. When you look at the Earth from outer space, you don't see any of that, right? You see what Buckminster Fuller called, and actually shows in his Dymaxion map, planet ocean. You see basically one landmass, almost unbroken, surrounded by one ocean. And the divisions are gone. And that revelation really does change your psyche, and it moves us in this direction of universality. 2 more points. 2004, Brother Wayne Teasdale. I didn't realize how many of these things are connected to Chicago. Brother Wayne Teasdale lived at Catholic University in Chicago, and he wrote his book. He wrote several, but he wrote his book called Mystic Heart, and it's where he brings out this whole notion of the interspiritual. Interfaith is when you have each religion in a silo, and sometimes on a panel. You know, you'll have a priest and a minister and a rabbi and an imam and a swami and a Buddhist monk, and they'll all be sitting there and they'll answer the same question, and each one will just look at the others and smile like, oh yes, that's very good, I agree, but you're going to hell, I know it. So, you know, I mean, the Buddhist guy is now bad karma, the Hindu guy, you know, whatever it is. But they don't really agree, but it's politically incorrect to say, boy, that's stupid. No, I don't buy that. So, but interspiritual is something else. Interspiritual is when, as Brother Wayne said, you go beneath the surface to the perennial, to the mystic heart, which is the perennial wisdom, which I will define in a second. And then the third, or the last thing, the seventh thing, is the return of the Divine Mother, the archetype of the feminine. And she is in some traditions, like Hinduism, she never disappeared. Much of Buddhism never lost contact with the feminine. But Christianity, not Catholicism so much, but Protestants really lost connection with the Mother of God. I mean, you know, in Catholicism, you have Mary becomes Theotokos, the Mother of God. I mean, when that happened, you could hear in the halls of every hospital, Dr. Young wanted, and you know, because you had to get, that was so Jungian, got to bring that stuff out. You have Joseph Campbell talking about things that way, this mythic, archetypal. So the church was willing to recognize that. In Judaism, Islam is having the most difficulty, I think, at the moment, but Judaism is I was going to say resurrecting, but that's not a good term for Jews. But in Judaism, we're reclaiming language that is thousands and thousands of years old, and we'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow, that all the spiritual language in Judaism is feminine. All 5 dimensions of consciousness, each dimension is considered feminine. We talk about when God speaks in the rabbinic literature, the rabbis refer to the revelation as a bat kol, like bat mitzvah, daughter of the commandments. A bat kol is the daughter's voice. So they somehow experience the divine revelation as a woman's voice. I mean, I always thought it was Charlton Heston, but turns out it wasn't. So in Judaism, we're reclaiming that. And it's transforming a lot of the way we do, you know, Jewish practice. So that's the 7th thing. So all these things are happening. The transformation is happening, and it's all rooted in the perennial wisdom. So what's the perennial wisdom? I handed out this little flyer from the One River Foundation, which is my not-for-profit. But I didn't hand it out to talk about One River. I handed it out because on the back it's got a decent definition of the 4 points of perennial wisdom. So, and again, if you know Madame Blavatsky, if you know Theosophy, you're going to go, oh yeah, we said that, right? We said that in the 1870s, 80s, 90s, and I'm just, you know, paraphrasing it here. So point number 1, all life arises in and is an expression of the non-dual infinite life called by many names: ultimate reality, God, Tao, nature, Mother, Allah, Brahman, Dharmakaya, whatever name your culture chooses. All of the mystics are telling us that there's just a singular process out of which you and I emerge and into which you and I return. So each of us is an absolutely unique expression of this singular reality, but we are all the same singular reality. So, you know, the Hindus use the metaphor of the ocean and the wave. Each wave is unique, but it's all the ocean. In Judaism, the mystics talked about the sun and the rays of the sun. So the divine, if you like, the core is the sun itself, and then when the sun extends into time and space, that's the rays, and you and I and all other beings in the universe are those rays. So that's number 1. Number 2, human beings contain 2 ways of knowing the world. A greater knowing, which knows that you are part of this infinite absolute, and a lesser knowing that gives you the sense of your own ego. Both of them are fine. My priest, I have a guru in every religion. My priest is Father Thomas Keating. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's in his 90s. He's getting ready to end his life here. And I've been with him since 1984. We meet regularly. We taught together. He was just a wonderful mentor for me. And the one thing that we constantly disagree on is the notion that he has of what he calls the false self. That's the lesser knowing, the ego. I don't think it's false. It's just not the whole story. The ego's problem isn't that it exists, it's that it thinks it's the only thing that exists. So we have these two ways of knowing, and they're innate. So spiritual practice doesn't give you something you lack, it simply removes the blinders so that you can see what you already have, this innate awareness of yourself as part of all selves, all beings, and the process from which all beings come. Third, awakening the greater self and knowing the interconnectedness of all life in the singular life carries with it a universal ethic. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly. And golden rule. I mean, there's the ethics of the religions, even in their siloed, brand-named frames, are pretty much the same. And they all ignore their own ethical traditions when it comes to women, when it comes to the other, when it comes to whoever it is they want to demonize. Suddenly they never heard of ethics, or suddenly their God says, love, like in the Hebrew Bible, love your neighbor as yourself, and kill every man, woman, child, and cow of the Amalekites. Clearly, you don't want to have a neighbor who's an Amalekite, then you can't kill them. So, what was going on there? So, if you're in a classical, conventional Jewish frame, you've got to find a way to make sense of those two things. My own feeling is, because I think different people wrote this at different times, someone was not taking their meds, and they ended up, homicidal, and someone else was smoking something else, and they were just, Mel, love your neighbor, man, right? So however it worked, I don't try to make these texts work together. I think there are two kinds of texts in our scripture. One that leads us, that really comes from this awareness that we are all interconnected and leads us to this ethic of universal compassion and justice, and another that sees us as separate, the religion of the lesser self, the separate egoic selves, the one that creates religions in its own image and demonizes those who do not belong. They're both part of us, but the higher one is the one that really is, I'd like to say on the upswing now. And I think it's true, but it may be Pollyanna-ish of me to think that. It depends, if I watch enough Fox television, then I think, oh no, the other religious mentality is coming out. And if I watch MSNBC, I think, oh no, the good religious mentality is losing out. So there's really no station to watch. Maybe the O Network, Oprah. I don't know who's going to help me out here, but it's a little scary. But I choose to believe that the authoritarian, frightening, us against them religions are doing what they're circling the wagons because they're afraid that something else is happening, and I hope the something else that's happening will win out, like it did in the first axial ultimately, that it'll win out in the second axial. And then the fourth part of the axial teaching is this is the highest thing, the realization of your own divinity and living out the ethic that comes with it is the highest thing that you and I as human beings can do. That's our ultimate task. We're not here to become powerful or wealthy, or we're here to become holy. And the way you become holy is to realize you're part of that greater wholeness with a W, and then you live out the ethic that flows from that, the golden rule. So the reason this is so necessary is because people who are searching for it are having a hard time finding it, because the religions that you get on the news, the religions you read about in the newspaper, see on television, are not the higher consciousness religions. The spiritual teachings and teachers who are leading us into the second axial, who are bringing us back to the perennial, are oftentimes hard to find. And the organizations that were spearheading this are oftentimes in going through hard times, financially and in other ways, trying to get the message out. So the fact that Theosophy still exists and the Theosophical Society still exists, and that you have paid membership and people are hopefully paying and keeping it alive is absolutely crucial, even though it's not what it used to be, size-wise, right? But it's still this important transformative element that Buckminster Fuller might call, if he were speaking about this, what he called trim tab. Remember, I don't know if you know what he meant by that, but Buckminster Fuller lived before we had the hydraulic stuff in our airplanes and our ships that we have today. He's talking about when he was in the Merchant Marine, he said, if you want to move a big ship, you can't just turn the rudder because the pressure of the ocean is too great. So you have baby rudders that they call trim tabs. And you could turn the little ones, and that would shift the pressure that would allow you to turn the big rudder, and that would make the ship turn. So what the Theosophical Society is doing, what we're trying to do with One River, what mystic communities of Sufis and other Jewish groups, because they're almost always Jewish, the Buddhists and the Hindus, and there's so many Jews in there, but these other groups are trying to do is to make the little shift, the trim tab shift, that will allow the whole of humanity to make the larger shift. That's why it's so important that you not only support something like, this is not a commercial, so I'm not saying, it's not a commercial for the Theosophical Society, but it is a commercial for the Perennial Wisdom that Madame Blavatsky and Annie Besant and the rest, promote. The stuff that's in the Quest magazine, the stuff that's in all the books that Theosophists write. That idea, whether it's called Theosophy or not, is absolutely crucial if we are going to make this axial turning a success, and not sort of an evolution of human consciousness rather than a devolution of human consciousness. So to help that, I put together two books, but we're just talking about one, called Perennial Wisdom for the Spiritually Independent. So my idea of the spiritually independent is like the politically independent. There are some ideas that conservatives have that I like. There are some that liberals have that I like. There's some that socialists have that I like. There's some that libertarians have that I like. But I don't belong to any one party. I just weave together the things I like, and I'm a spiritually independent person. A politically independent person. When I fill out, are you Democrat or Republican? I say I'm an independent. So I thought that's a good analogy for spirituality. There are things in Judaism I like and things I don't, things in Christianity I like and things I don't. So I go through and I pull what I like. Now what I like always ends up being the perennial. But I don't call myself, though I could, I don't call myself a perennialist. I'm Jewish, so I have to call myself a Jew. But I am what my rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi called, I am a Jewish practitioner of perennial wisdom. Right? So that's the tradition I come from, but what I'm really practicing is this perennial stuff. And in this book, what I tried to do was I identified 5 core existential questions that everybody asks that have answers in every religious tradition, but also have perennial answers. And I'm not going to go through them all, but the 5 questions are, who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going when I die? How should I live? And why? And when I started to look for what the different mystics had to say about those things, I discovered that they were really all saying the same thing. So I put a selection of them in this book with some commentary. But more importantly than that, I borrowed from Eknath Easwaran. How many of you are familiar with him? So a couple of you. And I think a lot of his books are in the library here. So Eknath Easwaran was, I didn't know him, so I can't say he was my teacher the way Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi was my teacher, or Sasaki Roshi was my teacher, or Father Thomas was my teacher. I knew those people in the flesh. Eknath Easwaran I only knew after, I came to know about him after he died. But essentially, he was a professor of Shakespeare who came to Berkeley University of California in Berkeley to teach Shakespeare, but he's born in India, and he got his PhD in India in Shakespeare studies. And he came here in the 60s and discovered that his students could care less about Shakespeare. They were enamored with the fact that he was an Indian, and would he teach them yoga and meditation? And he said, my PhD is in Shakespeare, but they weren't all that interested. What he ended up doing was taking his own life practice. I mean, it wasn't that he was a guru in some tradition. He was simply a devout Hindu who sort of expanded his understanding of spirituality and created his own 8-point plan for spiritual practice. And one of the points is passage meditation. And passage meditation is when you take a passage, a text, whatever tradition, whatever text you like, and you memorize it. And obviously this reflects back on his Shakespeare professorship. He would make the kids, memorize sonnets. And his thinking was, you never know when you need one of those. When it'll just pop into your head, something from Shakespeare, and it'll really be you've planted a seed of wisdom that will sprout when you need it. So he said the same thing about spiritual texts. He created a book called Make the Rivers Flow, which is an anthology of the texts that he thought you ought to memorize. Perennial Wisdom for the Spiritually Independent is an anthology of texts I think we ought to memorize. And when you do it, and we're going to do it in a second, when you actually use a text this way, it becomes very, very powerful. And I'm going to try to see if we can experience that. So the first question of the 5 is, who am I? And I'm going to feed you a line, and I want you to find someone to say it to. All right? So if you're at home, if you're watching this on the internet, if you're all by yourself, say it out loud, right? If you're watching with someone else, say it to somebody else. But here in the classroom or in the auditorium, just turn to somebody so you can actually repeat this to someone. But I want you to repeat it not as if someone else said it, because they're all I statements. See if you can repeat it as if you were saying it with integrity, that this is actually who you are. So, when Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, that's not one of the texts we're going to use, you would say to someone, I am the Alpha and the Omega. And then they would say it back to you, I am the Alpha and Omega. Can you identify with the cosmic I? And according to Shwaran, or at least the way I'm reading it, yes, the answer is yes, you can. So let's just try this and we'll play with it a little bit. So you're going to say this to somebody, which means you have to look at them. All right. And it could be awkward. It's like, oh no, I can't identify. But then you're in that, again, Father Thomas's false self. You want to get into the true self. You want to get into the Atman concept that knows it's Brahman. So we're speaking as Brahman in these things. So say to someone, I am the light above everything. So you're going to say, he's saying it to you. All right? So it's like, it makes you laugh, because it's like, oh, this is so awkward. But we'll just do a couple of these. I am everything. Everything came forth from me. Split wood, I am there. Lift up a rock, you will find me there. It's not because you're hiding under a rock. I mean, so why is that so difficult? Because it is, obviously. I mean, we don't have to, I'm watching the clock, we're going to go to questions, but why is that so uncomfortable? Or maybe it wasn't for you. Some narcissist is in here going, yeah, I'm everything, man. But why is that difficult?
It just seems a bit nervy.
Yeah, right, it seems nervy, and it is nervy. It's technically called chutzpahdik, right? It's galling, it's nervy, it's obnoxious if you say it from the ego.
Right. Yes.
Right? So, Jesus says, and that was from the Gospel of Thomas, by the way. So, Jesus will say in the Gospel of John, before Abraham was, I am. And then, someone in the crowd goes, what's he talking about? He's not, Abraham was thousands of years ago, and this guy is just 50 or actually 30 years old. How could that be? So, if you think Jesus is talking about Jesus, then you miss the point, right? When Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am, he's I don't know if you say quoting, but he's channeling the person of Chokhmah, Sophia, Lady Wisdom, in Psalm 8:22, when she says she was the first thing that was created. Before anything else, she's manifest. And everything comes through her. So he's tapping into this cosmic consciousness, what Paul will later call the mind of Christ. In the mind of Christ, there's no male or female, Jew or Greek. I got it backwards. There's no Jew or Greek, male or female, slave or free in Christ Jesus. He's not talking about, obviously, the guy Jesus. He's talking about some other frame. The church will say he's talking about the church, but the mystics will say, no, he's talking about a certain level of consciousness where the divisions, because those are the three big ones of his time, Jew and Greek, the divisions of ethnicity and politics and religion are gone. The boundaries between male and female are gone. I mean, these things still, are in our faces all the time. And slave and free is gone, which was huge back then. You were either a slave or a free person. So he's saying when you put on the mind of Christ, all of these things disappear. And when they disappear, then you can say, I am everything. Because you're not talking from the egoic. When I was in rabbinical school, I gave a talk about this. This was back in the 70s. And I was called to the dean's office because they were concerned that my theology was too far out there. And the dean said to me, you're a megalomaniac. And I said, no. A megalomaniac believes, in my case a megalomaniac believes he's God. I don't believe I'm God. I know I'm God. So when you're in that state of mind, you know you're God. When Moses asks God to define or to name, what's your name at the burning bush, we think God says, I will be what I will be. It's usually the translation. The Hebrew is ehiyah asher ehiyah. The first thing God says is this ehiyah, and then God backs it up and says, no, tell the people that I'm the unpronounceable name, the YHVH or the Yud He Vav He, what the rabbis, not translated, but offered a euphemism for that, Adonai. So Adonai, Lord, is just wrong. Right? It's just wrong. It's a noun, whereas Yud He Vav He, the unpronounceable name of God, is a verb. It's hierarchical, Lord, right? Whereas Yud He Vav He is not. And there's some debate whether it's Yud He Vav He is gendered at all, whereas Lord is clearly masculine. Whoever wrote that little verse in Exodus was giving us a theology, a process theology, because ehiyah is simply a verb form of the Hebrew verb, a future imperfect form of the Hebrew verb to be. So the best way, I think, to translate it is either ising or happening. But it's not like I is the ising that is always ising. It's not good in English. But it's for me, it's like God is the happening that is happening as all happening. But before you get to the Yud He Vav He, God uses the ehiyah, the first person singular. And that's the ultimate I that is all of us. That's the singular consciousness manifesting our own unique, smaller self. Yeah.
I think part of the thing for me is it's the difficulty in grasping and expressing non-duality.
Right.
Because that's the core of it. when you finally realize that that's that essence point, that's what makes it seem, well, I can't say that because I don't understand it, and I shouldn't be able to comprehend it anyway. So there's the backdoor loop.
Yeah. So what do you do with that?
Just experience it.
Right, exactly. So this is just a way of playing with it, trying to experience it. Even if the experience is, it's so uncomfortable. But that's what we're playing with. Because ultimately, the perennial wisdom is, it's so revolutionary that the little ego can't contain it. And then it crumbles and you step beyond it into something else. But yeah, when we're playing with it, it's very uncomfortable. But eventually, when you through meditation, through chanting, whatever you happen to do, you can actually say that with integrity. Of course, they put you in a mental institution for doing it, but.
With this shift, what do you see happening with worship forms?
Oh, great question. So, how do you worship the big S self, right? I think what we will ultimately see, and this is just obviously chutzpahdik, the end of worship. I think what we'll see instead is people coming together to sit in silence, people to come together to have deep, meaningful conversation, people coming together to chant, but not to actually worship a specific form. Now, if you listen to the bio, I am an initiate into the Ramakrishna order of Vedanta Hinduism, and there are Vedantists who say, no, having a form is fine. You can actually worship a form. And I've had experiences with God as form. It's always God as mother for me. And I used to find that really uncomfortable because I have this notion that, no, we have to go beyond all form. But if you're familiar with Andrew Harvey, so I went to Andrew Harvey, he's a friend of mine, and I said, this isn't working for me. I'm having I was actually having experiences of Mother Mary, which is bad for business if you're a rabbi. Right? But I was having these encounters with Mary. I was seeing her picture everywhere. I mean, I've got lots of stories, and she was talking to me, and I was taking my meds, but it's still. And I wanted it to go away because I felt I was looking for the non-dual, the Saguna Brahman without form, the God without form, and I was getting the Nirguna Brahma, the God without form, and I was getting the Sadguru Brahma, the God with form. And then Andrew says, are you truly a non-dualist? You think God is everything? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, God can also be form, so just chill. And I said, oh, okay. So, but I still think, for me personally, if there's a liturgy, I get itchy. Because I read it and I go, ugh, I don't believe this, I can't deal with this. So I think silence is the best practice. Or chanting, where you do like, kirtan or something like that, when you're using seed sounds and feeding them back and forth. There's lots of things you can do as a community that will take you to those levels of consciousness. But worship, for me, is not my strong point.
For me, it's mostly interferes with experiencing I'm everything is because from the childhood, whenever I say I am relating to this body, and even up to past 10 years, I was doing that. So now, when I'm getting into this spiritual seeking and understanding, I am everything, but still in the understanding stage, but I have to actually, me not be there to experience everything.
Right,
That's very difficult.
Yeah.
And you said like silence is probably the best way to get to that space where you can be as minimum as me, which the way I was conditioned from childhood, to let go so that I can be more expansive.
Right, except you can't let go because that's
Let
you.
go, yeah. Thank you.
Right? Yeah, no, that's really a powerful observation. So I would say a couple things. Number one, you can't let go because the you that you want to let go of is the you that wants to let go. So you can tell yourself, oh, I've surrendered. No, you haven't. When I've had what I would call spiritual experiences, I haven't had any experience at all because the I was gone. So I started practicing Zazen, Zen meditation, when I was 16 years old. It was so cool to go to the library here. I found the book I read first the first book I read was Houston Smith's, then it was called The Religions of Man. Now it's The World's Religions. But when it came to Zen, the first book I read was Christmas Humphrey's Zen Comes West. And I hadn't seen that book since I was a teenager, and it was on the bookshelf, so I took it down and obviously remembered it completely differently than he actually wrote it, but it was interesting to see it. But he teaches you how to do Zazen, how to meditate. And it was the summer of my senior year, and I was meditating on a lake in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And, you can't say what happened because I wasn't there, but I wasn't there. I sort of disappeared. And I don't know how long it lasted. It couldn't be very long. But when I came back, there was what in Judaism we call a rishimu. So a rishimu is when you go out and buy perfume, high quality, the oil itself, and you take the little bottle and you take the stopper out and you put it on a shelf, and eventually the oil evaporates and it's all gone. But the fragrance of the perfume permeates the air and the glass itself, the bottle itself. So we talk about a rishimu. So you're gone, but when you come back, and hopefully you come back, otherwise you have a real problem. But when you come back, there's a fragrance of something that was happening that you weren't there to experience. It was a happening, but there was no Rami at that instant to observe it. And in my case, what I got in that very first non-experience was a sense of love for and from all reality. And I was just laughing with this deep joy. And then, of course, as soon as that happens, you're 16, it's like, okay, I got to get that again. What do I do? Okay, let's go. Come on. Where is it? And I spent the rest of my life trying to get it again. But you can't do it that way. Spiritual practice, the way Father Thomas explains it, is that spiritual practice doesn't get you anything. It simply primes the pump for grace. That if you're ready at a certain moment, that's why in Zen literature, I don't know if a monk ever gets enlightened during Zazen. They always get enlightened when the Roshi slaps them on the head, twists the nose, they go walking, they see a leaf fall. You spend hours and hours and hours sitting cross-legged just so that you can get enlightened when you leave. But you need to do that work in order to have that thing. But then, just one other thing about what you said is, so what do I do with this I, which is always there? So I also love the teachings of Ramana Maharshi. And you ask yourself, so who is thinking this? Who is having this thought? And you can trace the egoic I back to something else. Now, as long as you're tracing it to something else, it's an object and not yet the subject. But I think you can get a sense that there's a bigger I behind the whole thing. But Andrew Harvey would say it doesn't matter. The little I or the big I, it's still all the same thing. I have a teacher named Prasanna. He's an Indian fellow who I study with whenever I'm lucky enough to be in Sonoma, California. He's a student of Ramana Maharshi. Prasanna's in his 80s. And he says, when I say, I'm not enlightened. And he says, how do you know you're not enlightened? The only way you know you're not enlightened is because you know what enlightenment is. And you don't have it. But if you know what enlightenment is, then you already have it. So you're just playing these mind games. Just give up the whole thing and don't worry about it. So that's what I'm trying to do. In fact, today I got an email from some guy because like you said, I write for Spirituality and Health magazine. People send me questions. You should send me questions and email rabbirami@gmail.com. And I'll feed them to the editors and see if they make it into the magazine. And then I write snarky little answers. But this guy was writing, and he says, I've been meditating for 11 years, and I can't get past, and he's following the Zen thing of counting your breaths 1 to 10. He says, I still can't do it. When do I graduate to the next kind of meditation? I wrote back, and I said, 1 to 10? I thought it was 1 to 2, and I can't do it. So I said, I've given up on that. I just sit because I like to sit. You know, I chant, I meditate because I enjoy it, but no longer to win a prize at the end. And this guy was still trying to win a prize, and that's the challenge.
I was just going to ask on worship, don't you think just communicating is worship?
Communicating with, oh yeah, like you and I talking, real communication. Yeah, I think it's holy. I don't know if I would call it worship, but yeah, I think it's a practice. I created something called Cup of Wisdom, where you would invite 5 friends to your house, and they would each invite one other friend, and we would provide you with free copies. Everything I do is free. Except here, you owe me money. But when the One River Foundation, everything is free. So we will send you a box of 12 World Wisdom Bibles, which is like this book, you know, collections of texts, and 12 coffee mugs with the logo on it, because I love what we call in Yiddish tchotchkes. You know, I love stuff that goes with, and a leadership guide. And the whole idea is that you just read a passage with a friend, and 12 people in a room, and just talk about it. Not about, oh, this is Hindu, what about Hinduism? I don't care. What does this wise perennial teaching say to you? And then people share, and that is a spiritual practice. I don't know if I'd call it worship exactly, but yeah, I think I get what you're saying, and I agree. Conversation, I mean, my motto is talk is cheap, conversation is priceless. And we don't have a lot of conversation. I mean, I'm lecturing, and it's Q&A, but that's not conversation. Conversation is when we really sit down. Martin Buber says that when you really have a conversation with someone, something he calls dialogue, if you know what you're going to say, it's not a conversation. You have to step out of your script and into what he called the in-between, where you don't know what the other is going to say, and you don't know what you're going to say, and you both simply respond to each other as equally holy being. And when that happens, he says that's when what he calls the I-thou encounter happens, the divine meeting the divine. And I mean, he says it happens not just with people, but with animals and with nature, but certainly with people, yeah.
In terms of the second axial age, it looks like the faiths or denominations that are most in sync with what you've been talking about, which generally speaking are the more liberal denominations, are the ones that are eroding the fastest. Fundamentalist ones, I mean, they're eroding kind of a little, but the mainstream denominations seem to be really just evaporating. And I'm wondering if you could say why you think that is.
Yeah, so, sure, I don't know. No, I don't know, but I have an opinion. If you're looking to grasp something, liberal religion isn't going to help you any. Right? If you're looking for a religion of answers, spirituality rooted in questions and conversation isn't going to help you any. So people who are looking for answers are going to go toward the more fundamentalist traditions. People who are not looking for answers, who are looking for questions, oftentimes have a view of religion that it's all about answers. They don't know where to go. So in my little town, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, there's a church on every, this is not an exaggeration, there's a church on every corner downtown. The place is just saturated with churches and bars. I don't know if there's a connection there, but saturated with churches. I have a circuit of Unitarian churches that I go to, and I'm at the Unitarian church in my town about once a month. And it's a tiny, I mean, this is a huge gathering for them. Yet they live in a town, a huge university town, 27,000 undergrads, faculty. The church should be, busting at the seams with thoughtful, intellectual, well-educated people who are looking for a deeper spirituality. The reason they're not, because I used to run the Science and Spirituality Forum at the university, the reason they're not is because no one knows you could do that. They never heard of Unitarians. They don't know what it is. When they ask people, a lot of times it's just New Age stuff, and they're not attracted to it. But it's just sort of a secret in the town that something like that exists. So people who should be interested in this kind of holy conversation, or this perennial wisdom, who are really part of the axial age, even if they never heard the term, don't know where to go, and imagine there is nowhere to go. Does that make sense? So I think they're crumbling. The other thing is, and this comes from Swami Vivekananda. Swami said, you can't, it's very hard to promote a religion that has no revealed text, no absolute guru, no rules. So in Theosophy, for example, there's no creed. Well, what do I believe? Come on, you got to tell me. No, we don't tell you that. We tell you to study, and it's sort of a jhana yoga kind of thing where you study the different religions and you find your way and you practice different things. I would argue that the communities of the future are going to be communities that come together, communities of curiosity. People will come together, and it's not going to be, we all chant Om Namah Shivaya, and that's what you have to do, though I love doing that. It's that we chant. Sometimes it's Om Namah Shivaya, sometimes it's Ave Maria, sometimes it's something in Hebrew, sometimes it's something in Greek, whatever it is, but chanting is a practice that we do here, but the form is fluid. A lot of people freak out. I need something fixed. I need to know that this is going to do it. But the people that are going to be second axial people aren't comfortable with this is what you do, but also aren't comfortable with, well, then there's nothing to do. I might as well stay home, So it just, we haven't found a way, and maybe I'm missing something, but it seems to me that there's got to be a way to market this idea again. There was a time when the Theosophy was a global, and still is a global movement, but a huge, powerful movement. Annie Besant was almost Prime Minister of India. So its impact is in the past, but it could once again be in the future. But we've got to figure out a way to let people know that this unformed expression of spirituality still exists. Unitarians have the same problem. Actually, just what you said. Liberal religions that are just open, have the same problem. So, in Judaism, Buddhism is the big attraction. Not the only, but, people are looking for, a lot of liberal Jews don't want the ritual, but they're looking for something deeper, and they go to Buddhism because they can't find it in Judaism. Now, it's there, but where are the rabbis that teach it? It's hard to find. In Nashville, where I live in the Nashville area, as far as I know, and hopefully maybe I'm wrong, but as far as I know, no one's teaching Jewish meditation, no one's teaching Jewish chanting. If you want that kind of stuff, you have to step into another religious frame. And you might do that for fun, but you're not going to necessarily do it you're not going to become a Hindu, you're not going to become a Buddhist, you're just sort of a dabbler. So the perennialists have got to do a better job about explaining what it is and how to practice in a community that's, what would you say, polydox. Everyone does her own or his own thing, but in a community of like-minded, or maybe not even like-minded, but common direction seekers. Have we exhausted your questions?
Well,
Then
maybe,
I'm going to do something else.
Yes.
Guys, I've got 11 minutes and I am not giving up the stage. So I meant to start with this, but we'll end with it instead. So there is a Hasidic, Jewish mystical melody. It's not a melody, I don't know what you say. Song, we'll just say that. A Jewish mystical song that gets to the heart of what we've been saying for the last hour and 20 minutes. And I'm going to teach it to you, and we'll try it, and then we'll unpack it very quickly, and that'll bring us to a close. Most Hasidic material music starts with what's called a nigun, a wordless melody. So if you've ever seen Fiddler on the Roof, you know what I'm talking about. This one goes, yai did it I did it I did I die yai die die die. That's the tune. So try that. Yai did it I did it I did I die yai die die die. Yai did it I did it I did I die yai die die die. Yai did it I did it I did I die yai die 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 yai die die. That's the first part of the song. But they put words into it, and it goes, Yai did I did it I did I die, I am alive. This is a Yiddish thing, but we're going to do it in English. Yai did it I did it I did I die, I am alive. Yai did it I did it I did I die, I am alive. Yai did it I did it I did I die, I am alive. I'm alive. So that, I'm not convinced. So let's just try it one more time, a little more. I know it's late and you want cookies, but just try again. Yeah, I did it, I did it, I did I die, I am alive. Yeah, I did it, I did it, I did I die, I am alive. Yeah, I did it, I did it, I did I die, I am alive. I'm alive. So this affirmation of the fact that you exist. I mean, it's an amazing thing that you exist. Last week was my birthday. I turned 66. But I'm really 13.8 billion plus 66 years old. Right? It took the universe 13.8 billion years to bring me to this point. I mean, how amazing is that? And I've never been here before. Even if you believe in reincarnation, you were never reincarnated as this before. Right? For good or bad, this is you. This is unique, right? And it's never going to be repeated. So the Hasidic chant starts out with this celebration of your own aliveness. How many of you are familiar with Cynthia Bourgeault? You know who she is? Yes. Some of you? So Cynthia and I have been together for a long time, but her granddaughter now is, I think, maybe 14 or 16. When she was 4, Cynthia and I were teaching together, and I taught this song. And she took it home and taught her granddaughter. And her granddaughter's name was Zoe. And she would do it this way. She would go, yeah, I did it, I did it, I did I die, I am alive. Yeah, I did it, I did it, I did I die, I am alive. Yeah, I did it, I did it, I did I die. I'm Zoe! And that's what you want. I mean, so it's back to that I thing. My little I, my small I, my egoic self is absolutely precious and unique. So I want to celebrate that. But then the Hasidim ask a question with the next verse. And it goes like this. And who is this aliveness I am? Even though it doesn't sound like a question, it's supposed to be a question. And who is this aliveness I am? And who is this aliveness I am? And who is this aliveness I am? You have to question the nature of your existence. Because you know there's more to you. Well, I would argue that all of us know, even if we don't know it consciously, that there's more to us than meets, pun intended, meets the eye, right? Right? The egoic eye. There's more to us than meets the eye, whether it's the physical eye. Albert Einstein says that the way our eyes are put in our head gives us what he calls the optical delusion of separation. So, I see you, and since I see you as being over there, not over here, just seeing you gives me the notion that, well, if you're there, then I must be here. And we miss the fact that it's just one process happening in both places simultaneously. So you have to question this I. First you celebrate it, and then you say, but is that all there is? And then the answer is, if not the Holy Blessed One. So in other words, what I really am is the divine. Call it whatever you want, even if you don't like God language at all. I mean, call it nature, call it whatever. But that's who we really are. So let's just put it together, and that'll bring us to a close. Yeah, I did it, I did it, I did I die, I am alive. Yeah, I did it, I did it, I did I die, I am alive. Yeah, I did it, I did it, I did I die, I am alive. I'm alive. And who is this aliveness I am? And who is this aliveness I am? And who is this aliveness I am? If not the Holy Blessed One.